as this project has been. So,
Right.
and are we,
Yeah.
this is that's done. Okay, good. So now we have, item number 9, which is the first of these, exciting, kind of overlapping with CHNEP objectives presentations. And I'm going to, ask Jamie to introduce yourself, and I just, is to present to the management committee an overview of the federally designated Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers program and proposals to potentially designate the Peace and Myakka Rivers as such. This is connected to the CCMP in 3 different areas. This could further numerous actions in the water quality improvement, hydrological restoration, and fish, wildlife, and habitat protection action plans, including most notably actions 1 and 1.1 to protect, restore, and monitor estuarine habitats and to promote best management practices for tidal creeks and rivers. And those are probably, we're going to hear about some of the other potential advantages if this proceeds, and where it's at and what we can do to find out more.
It works. This works.
Yes. There we go.
When you said okay.
Do we need the lights?
We want to do lights?
Yeah.
You can. Yep.
Better.
Okay. While we're getting the lights, my name is Jamie Doubek-Racine, National Park Service. In my previous life, I worked for the Sarasota Bay National Estuary Program. So I'm very familiar with your group today. It was actually one of the best jobs of my life. It was absolutely incredible. We did artificial reefs and all sorts of fun projects. This is equally loved, my job at the Park Service as a community planner in Florida. My home office is based in Atlanta, Georgia, but a lot of us are teleworking, of course. So I'm here to talk about the Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers program. If several of you were recently at the Myakka River Management Coordinating Council meeting, forgive me, this will be a repeat. Here we go. National Wild and Scenic Rivers System was created by Congress in 1968 to preserve certain rivers with outstanding natural, cultural, and recreational values in a free-flowing condition. So that is one of the criteria for designated rivers. This also is the protection of present and future generations. This is an interesting factoid. 228 rivers comprising 13,467 miles are protected in the national system. This is less than 1/2 of 1% of the nation's rivers. Pretty poor record. Due to the fact that we have this tool available to the United States, and we're not really utilizing this piece of legislation. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here today. For comparison, more than 75,000 large dams have modified at least 600,000 miles of rivers across the country, or approximately 17% of rivers in the United States. So that's really why this legislation was enacted also, was at the time of this piece of legislation in the 60s, a lot of our rivers were impaired, being dammed, and there was a creation of this piece of legislation to prevent future rivers from going down the same path. And the Wild and Scenic Rivers designation affords certain statutory protections. No new dams may be constructed, nor federally assisted water resources development projects that have an adverse effect of the designated river values. So we'll get into the outstandingly remarkable values, but again, the protection of this piece of legislation is there to prevent further impairment or degradation. This is just a nice quote, I thought. The affluent society is built well in terms of economic progress, but has neglected the protection of the very water we drink, as well as the values of fish and wildlife, scenic and outdoor recreation resources. Although often measureless in commercial terms, these values must be preserved by a program that will guarantee America some semblance of her great heritage of beautiful rivers. Senator Frank Church from Idaho arguing for the passage of this bill. Just gives me goosebumps. We are in this piece of legislation, we are seeking simply balance. We'll talk further about any restrictions or constraints of this piece of legislation if it were to become designated, or if you all were even interested in the possibility, but it is not constraining. It is there for protection. The Congress declares that the established national policy of dams and other construction of appropriate sections of the rivers of the United States needs to be complemented by a policy that would preserve other selected rivers or sections thereof in their free-flowing conditions to protect the water quality of such rivers. So again, kind of putting that stoppage to so many creation of dams. And I'm going to keep going because we're getting into time constraints, and then also it's a little bit repetitive.
And just for clarification, those are not our rivers.
No, they're not. We have white water. I don't know. No. But I have been on the Peace River when I was 12 and thoroughly had a wonderful time. Went to a little canoe outpost or two. So I've been on the Peace. Okay, so the differences between, let's say, a national park unit creation that has a wild and scenic river in it, and you see a park ranger out on a federally designated river, is the model on the left. That is these big, large properties that Congress has designated and created a new national park. That is not Partnership Wild and Scenic River. The antithesis to that. It is, so on the left, you've got the federally administered model managed by the National Park Service, BLM, US Forest Service, and the US Fish and Wildlife Service, which I see is going to be joining us soon. Mostly federal lands, those big tracts that you see out west or such as the Everglades. Partnership model is completely managed, locally led through local community driven efforts. And mostly non-federal land. There may be some partnership pieces of lands in there, but a lot of it is state and community held owned lands. Okay, so that's the difference. You will not see a ranger on a Partnership Wild and Scenic River. So federally owners, no federal ownership of and no federally managed lands are authorized in the legislation. It's very, very clear, and they all look the same. Local council with broad representation guides the management of the decisions in the river. Very important. NPS role is limited. We are only a partner at the table. We work with you like family and help you get funding to implement your comprehensive river management plan, which is a statutory mandate, and implement those community-driven projects that will help protect your river. This river management plan is locally developed prior to the designation, but sometimes, as in the Wekiva, which we'll talk about, which is the one of the two federally designated wild and scenic rivers in Florida. The CRMP, the Comprehensive River Management Plan, which is kind of similar to your CMP, was done after the designation. So it, nothing's all black and white. It can all kind of just flow. Cost shared among the partners, very much like an NEP program. It is, we have a host of municipalities at the table and state and federal, and we all kind of, it's not mandatory to lump funds to match, but it's always beneficial. And there are no NPS rangers. Talked about that. All right, one of the big emphasis besides free flowing is the outstandingly remarkable values. So those can be wildlife, habitat, water quality, water quantity, recreation, those type of things. But usually when you're developing your CRMP, you are listing out also your scenic, recreational, wildlife, and habitat, historic and cultural attributes. And at least one, along with being free-flowing condition, is the requirement for a nationally designated wild and scenic. And accordance with this, values in the river system's free-flowing characteristics and its immediate environment shall be protected for the benefit and enjoyment of present and future generations, section 1B. And they're usually identified in the enabling legislation or thereafter, but it can be in the study phase or thereafter. Also, there are 3 classifications that are usually identified after you've done your ORV listings. You have determined it's free flowing. You have segments that might meet the different criteria for different classifications: wild, scenic, and recreational. So we'll just quickly touch on the wild river areas, and you know if you're in a wild section of a river. You just, you know, you don't see anything. It is just trees and gorgeous, and it has that feel that you are in wild nature. But these rivers or sections of the rivers are free of impoundments and generally inaccessible except by the trail. Watersheds or shorelines, essentially primitive and waters unpolluted. These represented the vestiges of primitive America. Scenic river areas are those rivers or sections of rivers that are free of impoundments with shorelines or watersheds still largely primitive and shorelines largely undeveloped but accessible in places by roads. Recreational, you know, when you're in a recreational hub of the river. So this is our Wekiwa Springs State Park, where everyone is cooling off in the springs. And this component is, of course, designated as recreational, and that might be one of your canoe outposts or you know, some heavy use of recreation in that particular segment. And here's your comprehensive river management plan, which is identified in the Act as being a requirement. And it describes all these river values, who's going to manage. There's something called eligibility and suitability. Eligibility means only did you possess one of those ORVs, the outstandingly remarkable values, and also is it free flowing? Suitability means how are you going to manage the river as a partnership wild and scenic river, or did you want to make this a new national park? 2 new studies going on in the state of Florida that you might have heard. Little Manatee River in Hillsborough, and also the Kissimmee River in Central Florida. And those were driven through community support as well as congressional support. And those were rolled up in the President's Omnibus Bill back at the end of 2022, which is how things, I will be frank, how bills are being passed as of late, last couple of years. They're just being rolled up because they had tried a couple years ago on both of those rivers, and this is how they both got passed. So the NPS is actively now in 2024 getting ready to start on both of those studies. They had to wait for we had to wait for funding to start those studies. And those studies take up to 3 years. Our family in the Northeast is where all the partnership rivers are. We have one in Florida, which is the Wekiwa Wild and Scenic Partnership River. We have the Loxahatchee, which is only a couple miles of it, 6 to 9 miles, is designated wild and scenic, but that was a different management style. It's called a 2A2 river. Okay, and that is different than a partnership. And the rest of the rivers, as far as partnership go, about 17, 18 of them now are in the Northeast. And that's because we've got a lot of congressional support. And also we have a individual who for the past 25 years of his career has just gone out and started one after the other, assisting communities. And his name is Jamie Fosberg, and he is with the Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers program in the Northeast. He helped us on the Wekiva. So that's why you see them all in the Northeast. We hope to have more in Florida. Again, no federal ownership, designation and implementation. The management plan is through a council or committee such as this. Yes, you can use a pre-existing committee that it is working and functioning just fine. In the legislation, your legislation can mimic others that have been already written and passed and can serve as a template. The cost and the responsibilities associated with managing and protecting river resources are shared. That is true. I would just go ahead and describe, though, the budget that has been on the last couple of years. We're now up to about 220,000 from the feds through the Partnership Coalition of Rivers, which is kind of interesting. They have their own little organization, and that is how the funding comes forward through the National Park Service, through a cooperative agreement with the local community. So that is being utilized in the Wekiva system to pay for a full-time river ambassador for public education and outreach and stewardship activities. And also just a new hire recently, and this is independent contractor, but a social media coordinator, part-time. We hope to have a third position. And again, I always mimic my heyday at the NEP. To have that staff to implement these programs is critical, right? So I hope to, or we hope to in the Wekiva, is also have some river patrol, river monitoring, because that is another huge, huge need. So you don't have people, you can't do anything. So we definitely fund projects and studies, lots of funding of studies. Right now, we're getting ready to fund an eelgrass mapping study in the basin. The whole Wekiva River has not been mapped. We do work with the St. Johns River Water Management District, but they're on our team. We're getting ready to do that. So that I'm kind of on a tailspin here, but that goes to some of the funding that's available. And we do partner with all of the local communities. And one other additional item would be that since we are designated, let's say in the Wekiva, that avails you to other additional funds that other folks can't apply for because it's a designated river within the National Park Service. So there's a challenge cost share that's due at 12 o'clock tonight that I'm going to try to get, back to the office and write $25,000. And we just wrote another grant for the eelgrass to match funds. And that was with the National Park Foundation. And again, can't avail yourself to those funds unless you're designated. So you do get more perks than just the outlay of the 220,000, which is, I think, pretty substantial. And you're getting me stopped, right? If it's good. Okay. Here's some of the benefits: national recognition, that you're a national wild and scenic river. I think it's a big deal. The agency technical and financial assistance, we can bring other technical experts to the table, and the other wild and scenic river funding. So I jumped ahead of myself, but here it is. And then the wild and scenic river agency review of federally assisted water resources projects. So we would also assist on, under a Section 7 review, make a determination on a particular project that is only kick-started when it's a water resources project, such as through an Army Corps of Engineers permit pulled. Let's say if you have a new bridge going in, then the Park Service would actively be working on that. We had a new bridge in the Wekiva because they did a huge project, roadway project, and we worked very closely with the Florida Department of Transportation and our committee on making some changes to the design. It did not negate the project. It typically is not going to negate a project unless it is a cell phone right on the river. You know, it doesn't stop, but it may make that project a lot better through design and through oversight. So, and here again, the technical assistance and the funding, we've already talked about that. How do things get designated? So the traditional process is community support, coalition gathering, going to your member of Congress who is in your district, sitting down with them, saying, hey, we have this idea, we really need your support. Would you go forward on this for us? Once that is all confirmed, yes, everything's great, then you would traditionally go through the designation process, but have a study first. There have been instances where the entire process of study has been foregone, and it is just simply designated a wild and scenic river. And you do the CRMP after. Now in the Wekiva, it was a little bit of both. We had the study first, but we didn't do the CRMP till after, and it worked out fine. Just the study had enough information, enough meat in it. You do not have to rely on National Park Service to do a study. They like to do the study. We like to do the study, but it can also be done at the local level and presented as part of the package, especially if there's been a lot of information already compiled and there is already a CMP. Study piece of legislation, very small. I left it in my printer back at the office. I'm sorry, I was going to hand that all out. I can't even read it, but it's very small. And the study typically takes about 3 years. And there is a chock full of information on rivers.gov. That's what that little hammer says that we can't all read. It's everything that you want to know about Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers or Wild and Scenic Rivers, rivers.gov. And I think I'm saying that right. But it has questions. What questions do you have if you are federally designated? What constraints are on my rights to do things? And you'll get a lot of insight. Our committee probably meets, this says monthly meetings for the study committee. That's variable. Transparency, open process, government in the sunshine, website, direct mailings, open meetings. And we generally follow the state's open meeting laws.
Just because we are running down to our last 5 minutes, if you can, now that we have a good overview of the process, kind of dive into the Myakka and Peace.
Oh, sure.
Specifically, like what's being proposed and where these entities might want.
Oh, yeah, and I gave you all a good foundation.
It is very good. I just want to make sure you cover that before we run out of time.
Okay, no, that's good. So can I just free flow?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, so we can do the lights if you want.
Yeah, definitely.
So here's where we're at. The Myakka River is a little bit different than the Peace River. I mean, obviously, because it's just being two different rivers. Yeah, that was great. But so back in the day when the Partnership Rivers program was just really getting started, late 70s, early 80s, you had a lot of these studies happening through the National Park Service based on a National Rivers Inventory. So there's this big map, National Rivers Inventory map, that has potential future wild and scenic rivers that could be designated. Well, the Peace is on the National Rivers Inventory. The Myakka is also on this map. You can look it up. It is going through a metamorphosis because it needs to be updated. But the long and the short of it is the Myakka River had a study done back in 1984. It was completed. So what's interesting about that is why didn't it go farther back in the day? So it was suggested that the Myakka River, all 34 miles of it, should be included in the Wild and Scenic Rivers program. Now, at that time, it was suggested that it be state managed. Well, what happened? The state said, okay, Park Service, we'll do that. And they made it a state, the first state wild and scenic river in Florida. That happened because of that study. I didn't even know about that study. So anyway, take us to from 84 to today. And it's been, the dust has been taken off of the study. And we've been talking with the Myakka River Management Coordinating Council, and they're interested in going forward and having that, the river designated as a partnership wild and scenic river. How would that work? Very easily. You could just layer on top of the council that's already in place and have that extra layer of protection. If there was the will of a congressional sponsor. So that's that. Yes, that would be, I don't know if you're going to talk about support of this committee for that effort, but that's going on for the 34 miles. It's already state designated. And then the Peace River. So Jennifer and I were talking, I don't know, before Christmas, a month before that. And I was explaining to her about the Partnership Wild and Scenic River program. There's also Park Service meeting with representatives in some of the municipalities along the Peace asking for rivers, trails, and conservation assistance and FEMA assistance. I mean, so it all kind of coalesces. Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance is my sister program with this Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers program. So I was explaining about the, the pieces on the National Rivers Inventory. Maybe there is interest at the local community to make certain segments or a study or all of the river, what have you, as a future partnership, Wild and Scenic Rivers. So Jennifer was saying, well, that's how we operate now as a partnership. And there was a lot of similarities. A lot of these new programs, the federal government doesn't do business the way they used to do. It is all about partnerships. That is, I don't know what Kathleen's going to be talking about, but even Fish and Wildlife, all about partnerships now. We all manage those resources together.
So there are links to some of those previous studies in the agenda package. I don't know if anyone had
Oh,
to that 1984 Myakka Rivers.
the study?
Yes.
Excellent.
And I just want us to have a little bit of time to discuss the potential of recommending to the policy committee that they support examination of a partnership wild and river scenic river designation of the Peace and Myakka Rivers for the purposes of conducting a study of the Peace River, as well as implementing the 1984 Myakka River study recommendation to designate at least the 12 miles of river within Myakka River State Park and possibly more for that federal designation. So I wanted to put that out there because that's a draft recommendation presented for your consideration. And, before we move on.
And if I could just add that, we put this recommendation, we certainly can adjust this as a committee to your liking, but we picked up what we thought was like a very conservative recommendation to start with. I mean, we're talking about the part of the Myakka that's already in the state park, and with the Peace conducting a study, as it was mentioned, the study isn't necessarily required. But that could be a precursor step that would then allow a second opportunity for policymakers after seeing that to determine whether they want to proceed with designation. So thinking about the policy committee and their lens of what you would want to recommend to them, we wanted to reserve about 10 minutes now for you to ask questions and have that discussion.
Well, I've got a related question. Would that potentially lead to adding some tasks related to those studies in the CCMP in the future, or is that something that would happen outside?
Well, and I think to Jamie's point, like one of the things that you were mentioning is that you need kind of a body to implement these designations. They don't really do anything in and of themselves without people behind them. So in the case of the Myakka, you have a body called the Myakka River Coordinating Council. In the case of the Peace, we were suggesting that potentially the CHNEP is essentially such a body that could be the continuing implementer over time, so that things would come back to us and we would discuss as a body and can carry that forward. So, you know, thinking forward, like if the designation were to occur, who would actually be responsible to implement it? That was what we were discussing, is would the CHDP be able to serve that function for the Peace?
Jennifer, I have a question for you. Are you envisioning when you do this, like talking to the other counties, like the tributaries being included or not? That's, you know, it's the Peace River, but does this go a little further? Like, you know, where we are up there, we've got some, you know, areas, you know, tributaries. Is that part of it?
So the study, I think, would be an opportunity to explore that, but I know that Jamie's already been talking to others, so maybe you can enlighten us on.
Right, so in the Wekiva, we did include the Blackwater Creek Trib, Rock Springs Run, the little, there was one trib that was left out, and that happened through the vetting purpose, the vetting process of the study, which is, you know, if you have community workshops, you're gonna know who wants in and who wants out.
Right.
Or the values are not that great because they are so severely impaired. You can leave out, put in, come back after restoration years later, add to, which is what they did in the Lamprey in the Northeast. You can start small. You can, if you want to say, let's just start small and get one designated, you can go back.
You can amend.
You
Okay.
can amend that legislation. So, and that's why you have a study process. It's for this vetting. You want to, and you know, your congressperson in all likelihood wants to know it's been vetted and there's community support. And in these studies, usually you have your support letters by your different municipalities, et cetera. So it's clean.
Thank you.
So follow-up question to that, and then I'll have another question too, but for the Myakka, there is a council, coordinating council. So how is that formed? Because it seems like that model is working for Myakka, and, you know, would we want to do the same thing so that entities that are not part of CHNEP or the CHNEP might also be included without having to add to the committees here? So can you speak to that at all?
Well, just that the Myakka River Management Coordinating Council was set up when it was state designated through the Myakka Protection and Scenic Act, River Act. So it was very much because of the study. So it was established specifically because of the study and specifically for state designation. We simply thought it was easy to go ahead and perhaps use that in a templated future piece of legislation because it was already set up so specific to the state designate. It just works. Yeah, you can always add members to that council. So you can write that also in your draft piece of legislation. And you can have in your management plan rules that govern how the management committee or council operates, who can add, and in this particular instance of the state, they can add with a majority vote of the council to add a new member. Let's say you want the Nation Conservancy added, like we did in the Wakaiba. We're now adding the Save the Manatee Club because of the manatee die-off in the Indian River Lagoon, but we still have eelgrass. So we thought we better bring in the Save the Manatee Club to our membership. It was that critical, super critical. And we just voted to add them. So your management plan or your CMP or your future CRMP would dictate those management rules to add.
The consideration, I think, for the CHNP, if we're using this as a vehicle to get the study, then how do we then hand it off?
Well, and at this point, the discussion would be, supporting the study, supporting the concept of a study for of studying the designation. Because it's early in some ways. Lots of public outreach probably would end up occurring, but a lot of work's been done. And a lot of stakeholders are already interested in it. And it ties in with these other existing initiatives, some of which are state driven, some of which are more federal driven. And there may be a synergy that could happen just through the policy committee expressing support for those, either implementation of the previous study or a new study.
Sorry, I have one more question.
No, and I think that's a great point. The implementing body doesn't have to be the CHNP. It's just that we were saying there's something that exists that could potentially serve that purpose, because we do also have a CAC. So we have the community leaders from those counties. We have between the 4 committees, we have a good broad representation. But we also serve on the Myakka River Coordinating Council. The CHNP is a member of that. So there's a good crossover here, but we wanted to bring this to inform you all and see if you had a desire to form any kind of recommendation to policy, because they're going to be hearing the same presentation.
Yeah, and I think going to each of the entities, at least from our perspective, would be the preferred option versus using the CHNP for those reasons, because adding, and then we would have to get some clarification, even though it's early in the process and we're talking about a study, but it may be the turn into the coordinating council. And so kind of looking out to the future. And I bring it up specifically for my next point, which is what are the impacts for existing water users? So I'm talking about large entities, not individual users, but permitted entities and planned entities. Because we talk about free flowing state and the river value, no impacts to that. So I wasn't sure. I looked at the website, but it didn't clearly state how that, and obviously as a water management district, it's of high interest to us of those impacts, because the Peace River is absolutely being looked at for potable uses, in addition to the minimum flows and levels being reevaluated, under reevaluation currently.
Everything is managed so we work with our water management district, the St. John's for the Wakaiba. We follow the BMAP and the TMDLs and all up through FDEP. We are simply a partner at the table. It is all locally and state driven, as the management structure is already in place for, water quality monitoring, water quantity, those measures that are management practices that are already in place are deferred to. Now, if there's something that occurs that there is such severe impairment through the current management structure, we would all as a committee talk about that and work with those policies that are already in place.
Has that come up in any of the other areas yet? I mean, obviously it's a great, this would be an item for discussion that the water management districts would want to hear about. How is it going to be addressed? Because we're talking, existing seems that you'll take that into account, but there's also planned specifically in Peace River. And may not be for some time, so I'm not sure how that comes into play.
Yeah, we work really, really well with our water management district. When there are issues, we raise concerns and we work together as a committee on those issues.
So as I understand that the regulatory side is really like, as you mentioned, it's really locally and state. This partnership model is instead of a top down, the other side of it is top down, but this is bottom up, the partnership. That's why we thought this route worked well, you know, for our areas. And it basically would be governed by all the entities who sit on that council ultimately, and that could be constructed. That would be part of the study to explore who that should be and what, how that should operate, as you mentioned. But I think the benefits are the extra money that it can bring, the extra federal resources. So, it's not meant to be regulatory, it's meant to be additive and providing additional resources and protection.
The management
Protection and like restriction.
Right.
Protection and like, you know, making sure that there are resources to uphold the values that the river is already providing.
And if state parks, Wakaiwa State Parks, manager was here, or if, Jody Slater was here from the St. Johns River Water Management District, she could say, I hear you. I hear you're cautious about this, but we have a really good working relationship. And it's not, you don't need to be concerned the way that you might be about these future actions, because we're as a partner, and a lot of our management plan is public education and outreach driven. So I hear you, but we just have a very good working relationship. And the Water Management District went through every single policy and objective written in the comprehensive river management plan and approved it. You know, so it's a whole committee working together to where there's consensus on that management plan before it is approved.
So if the committee doesn't come to a consensus, because I'm thinking,
We do.
so because there's the water management districts have a requirement to meet the public water needs.
Right.
And there may also be a side that has a different priority. So even within the committee, there may be competing.
We had lawyers where we were all doing conference calls, you know, on the water section of the document. So it just, we didn't stop till we got there for the language drafted in those policy objectives. Right. So.
Thank you.
Another question.
Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I didn't know that Myakka River was state classified as wild and scenic.
Yes, the only one in the state.
Yeah, I know it's wild and scenic, but I didn't know there was like a state versus federal thing. So maybe, I don't know if it's important if in this recommendation to add like a federal part to that designation. That, to me, that would help clarify it.
Oh,
Yes,
national.
national, okay. And then my other question is, if we move forward with the Myakka River, is that 1984 study, would that need to be updated if conditions have
Should
changed?
have a few page update addendum to it,
That was my only other comment. Maybe we could add a,
because a lot has changed. A lot of the recommendations have been followed. A lot of acquisition for lands that weren't in public ownership are now, Carlton Reserve, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's actually moved things up. Dams have been removed, weirs have been removed. And another one is being planned, is crumbled, and it's being planned for removal as well.
Maybe would you like to make a motion to that effect?
And I'm gonna suggest that the motion include whatever the motion is in support of accomplishing the CHNEP, CNPP objectives related to that area. So that, this is, not gonna be hopefully perceived by anybody as a federalization of the Peace and Myakka Rivers, because I can, that probably wouldn't go over real well. So, it should be clear.
Just to confirm, so we're recommending would NPS do the study through what we're,
That's to be determined.
still to be determined, okay.
This is, I think it's conceptual in support of pursuing the designations or studying the designations.
What is the cost involved in something like that, like doing a study?
Park Service is allocating $200,000 for each of the studies, or maybe 250, I'm not quite sure, for both the studies for the Little Manatee and the Kissimmee. If I had my druthers, it would be through a cooperative agreement, and it would be at the local level with a consultant to make sure that there's a lot of ownership. There's other ways to do it through Park Service, through the planning division, and that's probably how they're gonna go. And then hire staff. So what happens is it kind of goes out of everyone's hands for a little while. Once the study has been approved and designated, it goes up to Washington, and then it flows back down to the region. And then they start the public input process and meet with communities. It takes up to 3 years. Doesn't have to.
That'd be right.
On the Myakka River, I see that maybe it's just for political ease, only the 12 miles in the state park, but there is a significant amount of conserved land all along the way in Sarasota County. Some of that is much more recent than the 1984 study, as is being said, and it just, we are also members of the management committee. I don't, and of course, preferably with the whole river, but we know there are other counties involved, but within, I just think there's an advantage to actually just mirroring where the state wildlife scenic is.
And that was the kind of Jennifer thought would at least be worth putting on the table for your consideration to consider making a recommendation that the policy board would, take it a little bit further. In furtherance of existing state objectives and existing CNPP objectives.
Right, within the state, it is, the whole 34 miles is state designated already. So there's already legislation to that, so. And it was the 30, it wasn't that it was not included for the whole Myakka River and Sarasota County for the federal study.
I mean, this motion, again, could be that you're gonna ask the policy board to contact other, partner agencies and bounce the idea off of them. This is somewhat conceptual at this moment. Kaylee.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree, and I agree with Debbie. I like that this is kind of a conservative first approach. I think it allows us to grab at the low hanging fruit, and then from hearing from Jamie that it's relatively easy to add or amend or take away. I think where the lift would be on getting the rest of the 34 is maybe getting some of the other counties on board and some of that outreach. So it sounds like maybe there's something to add into the motion about establishing those conversations like Dave was saying.
So I want clarification because I think 34 acres of the 52 acres, 31 acres in the state designation is all Sarasota County, and the 12 miles, 30 miles. The 12 miles is just state park, but Sarasota County is already bought into being within the state designation. So I think it makes sense for instance, Sarasota County has its own designation and support for protecting the Myakka River. So if we may not be able to bring in manatees and Charlotte for the remaining 30 miles, but I would hope that it's not just the 12 miles in the initial recommendation. It is the entire area already designated as state wildlife standards.
I just want to offer one thought on that. So the year that it was designated, do you know that by the state, the Myakka River?
Oh,
right? Yeah. So my concern is that policymakers have changed out since that occurred. So again, like the 12 miles is all within public lands. If you do the entire 30, you have a blend of public and private lands. And we don't know where the current policymakers are at. That's part of this exercise of bringing it to the policy committee next to get their input. So just keep that in mind when you're forming your recommendation. We were making sure that we had something that we felt, again, it can be expanded upon at a later date, but you know, we don't want to walk away potentially with nothing. So what is a reasonable thing that we think that they would be amenable?
I think it would be a matter of just amending that we would move forward with a recommendation like this and then add some sort of verbiage of with the intent of exploring expansion, with the intent of exploring addition of the 30 or 20, however many miles are left.
You could leave the miles out also if you're having a hard time with that. And I know that behind the scenes, there's going to be briefings being held with county administrator, city of Venice, city of Northport, only Sarasota County, Manatee and Charlotte were not for this phase, not being talked about at this point right now. So those things are happening at the same time.
Yeah, if the point of the study is to tell you, you know, don't go in there with an answer, ask the study what it's gonna give you. Like you said, if you leave the miles out and let the study drive.
That's mixing two things. So the
Okay.
miles pertains to Myakka that already has a study.
Right. Okay.
So that's,
Okay.
so, and the piece has no study. So that's why that recommendation is to utilize the 1984 Myakka study to move forward with
And
one of
not-
its recommendations versus a
Okay.
piece where we need to undertake a study. We have
Okay, so the Myakka, you'd be asking the question, you know, can we move forward with what we already have, not expand that study right now, do something different?
move forward with, in this case, the 12 miles within the state
Got
park.
it. Thank you for a small portion of what is designated state.
The Peace River, is it the entire river that is the plan?
I'll make a motion. I think we should go for it and recommend it to the policy committee for the study to be done.
I'll second that.
Yeah, we have a motion from Sheila McNamara, and a second from James, who's now here. Oh, okay, Paul.
And motion maker, can I clarify before it said in support of implementation of CHNEP, CCMP, do you want that added into the language of the motion to policy? That we clarify that we're making this recommendation because we believe it's in support of the implementation of the CHNEP, CCMP.
I think that's good to add.
The current state priorities as well might be, I don't know. where
And
they-
Paul, you were the second. Do you agree to that amendment?
Yes.
I have one. So for the reasons that I stated about the impacts to the MFLs and existing users and planned total water use, I would not be supporting it. And I want to clarify that it's just lack of information. I think we'll be probably touching base before the policy board to try to get some of that information before it comes to our board member.
Okay. Yeah, we'll make sure to get A's, no's and abstentions recorded. So we'll record it in the minutes.
Very good. So, any other comments or questions or discussion before we?
Comment and question. 1985, chapter 258, part 3 of the Florida statutes created the Myakka Wild and Scenic Designation. And it encompasses 34 miles of the river. Just want to, you had some discussions, clarify. That's right now ordinance when we join. My question is there a requirement to be state designated and the Wild and Scenic Peace River first before federal? You
No.
can do the reverse, right? And the motion just is to support a study and not to support joining at this point. Just study on all the pros and cons of being designated federal, because we are all very worried about federal impacts versus, you know, we want local and state control. Now we're adding a level
The
of.
motion maker can correct me, but I believe the motion is to support a study for the piece and implementation of the previous study for Myakka.
Updating the Myakka study.
No, including seeking federal designation for a portion of Myakka,
The 12 miles in the state park.
which was already recommended 40 years ago.
And that update can come later if we need to expand it.
Or, yeah, that might be one of the results of the discussions that happen once this is put out on the table, and it is out on the table, so it's a matter of, you know, do you want to weigh in on it? That correct, Sheila? It's just, okay, well, any other last comments, and then maybe we'll ask for you to vote on the motion, and all in favor could say aye. Any abstentions?
I'm gonna abstain in support of my fellow water management district, so we learn a little bit more about it.
Okay.
I really don't see much harm in initiating a study, looking at it, but
And any noes or nays?
I'm abstaining too.
Okay.
Port is a water user off of the Myakka Creek, which feeds into the Myakka, and I need to know more about the implications of this before I support it.
I'll also abstain. I agree with, I like the idea and where this is going, but since I will need more information from my.
Good. And anyone opposed? Very good. Well, I think that,
Oh, wait.
oh,
We have the Southwest.
Yes, my plan was
To
to.
vote against this, right, until there's
you
more.
want to oppose and abstain, or no, you can't?
I was not planning to abstain, my.
Okay, got
The
it.
other district.
Thank you.
So I have abstentions as South Florida Water Management District, City of Northport, and Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and no vote from Southwest Florida Water Management District. The rest are voting in favor. If I did not characterize, please let me know. All right?
Thank you very much.